I booked the Boise Airbnb because it was cheap and simple. Just a clean place close to campus where I could stay for a week while cranking through a research paper. I didn't care about decor or atmosphere. I just needed reliable Wi-Fi and a quiet place to think. The listing was a little vague. Private guest suite with bathroom access 5 minutes from downtown. But the pictures showed a clean room, queen bed, and a bathroom with a large mirror above the sink. For $70 a night, I wasn't going to nitpick. Nothing stood out the first couple of days. The host, a man in his late 40s named Mark, handed me the key code when I arrived and gave me the usual run-through about Wi-Fi passwords and trash days. He seemed polite, if a little brisk, and I appreciated that he didn't linger. The room was what I expected, basic but functional. I set up my laptop on the desk, stacked my notes, and fell into my routine. During the day, I worked on drafts. At night, I grabbed takeout and watched bad TV on my tablet until I fell asleep. But by the third night, I started noticing something about the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was slightly crooked. Not enough to be obvious at first look, just tilted a couple degrees left. It bugged me. I adjusted it back, but the next morning, when I went in to brush my teeth, it was tilted again. I told myself it was loose. Old houses have quirks, and this one had plenty. The floor creaked. The windows rattled when the wind picked up, but something about the mirror nagged at me. That night, after showering, I reached behind it to check for loose hooks. Instead of a hook, my fingers brushed the edge of a hole, round, cleanly drilled. I bent down, squinting. In the shadowy gap, something caught the light. A small glassy circle, no bigger than a dime. A lens. For a second, I just stared, toothbrush in hand, trying to talk myself out of what I was seeing. Maybe it was a pipe fitting. Maybe a bolt. But the longer I looked, the less those explanations held up. The angle was perfect, pointed directly at the shower. I stepped back and my chest felt tight. I didn't touch it again. Instead, I snapped a photo on my phone, zoomed in, and the image made it undeniable. A camera, hidden behind the mirror. My first instinct was to march straight upstairs and confront Mark. But a voice in my head said, if he's watching you, then he knows what you're doing right now. I set the phone down and forced myself to think. I unplugged my laptop, stuffed it and my notes into my bag, and left the light on in the bathroom like nothing had changed. I went to a diner downtown, ordered coffee, and sat there scrolling through Airbnb's safety page. Hidden cameras were explicitly banned. There was even a hotline. I called it. The rep was calm, almost too calm, as I explained. She asked me to email the photo and told me to leave the property immediately. We'll investigate, she said, promising a refund. But that didn't answer the question boiling in my head. What do I do right now? At midnight, with nowhere else lined up, I checked into a chain hotel off the highway. Sterile, overpriced, but the lock clicked behind me and I could breathe again. The next day, Airbnb followed up asking for more details. They said they'd contact the host. I never heard back about that part. What I did hear was from another guest. A week later, I checked the listing. It was gone. But the host's profile still existed, and on one of his other properties, a new review popped up. Place was fine, but something about the bathroom mirror made me uncomfortable. I didn't sleep much that night, because that meant I wasn't the only one. Now, every time I stay in an Airbnb, or any rental really, I check everything. Mirrors, smoke detectors, clocks. Anywhere a lens could hide. I never wanted to be the paranoid type, but I'd rather be paranoid than filmed without knowing it. When I think about that week in Boise, it's not the camera that unsettles me most. It's the fact that if I hadn't touched the mirror, I never would have known. I'd been doing travel nurse assignments for a few years by then, and I'd gotten used to bouncing from city to city. Hotels were fine for short contracts, but when it stretched beyond a week or two, I preferred Airbnb. More space, a kitchen, and usually quieter than dealing with hotel guests slamming doors at 2 a.m. This assignment was in Fresno, California, May of last year. The hospital set me up with a decent stipend, so I booked a single-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Pretty basic place. Stucco walls, a gravel yard out front, and a lemon tree out back. It was exactly the kind of place you don't think about after you leave, which was fine by me. I was on autopilot for the first few days. I worked 12-hour shifts, came home, reheated leftovers, and slept like a rock. The neighborhood was quiet enough that the loudest thing I ever heard was a sprinkler or some dog barking way down the street. Then on my third night, just after 7 p.m, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no check-ins. When I opened the blinds, I saw a man standing on the porch in a polo shirt with an Airbnb logo stitched on the chest. He had a lanyard badge that looked official and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Mid-30s maybe, average build, shaved head. When I cracked the door, he smiled like he'd been waiting for me. "Evening," he said. "Airbnb maintenance. Just need to run a quick smoke detector check. Company policy." It didn't sound right. I'd rented plenty of Airbnbs before and never once had anyone show up mid-stay for something like that. Usually, if there was an issue, it came through the app, never with someone at the door. But he had the shirt, the badge, the clipboard, and the way he said it, calm, like this was routine, made it hard to immediately shut him down without feeling like I'd look paranoid. I asked, "Got paperwork or something from the host?" He tapped the badge hanging around his neck. It had a QR code, a logo, his picture, and a first name, Aaron. It looked legit enough from where I was standing. "Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, he added, already looking past me into the house like he expected me to let him in. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. He stepped inside, looked around, and immediately started scribbling something on his clipboard. "You're here solo?" he asked, casually. "Yep," I said, keeping my tone flat. He nodded like he already knew the answer. He didn't go straight to the smoke detectors. Instead, he lingered in the hallway, poking his head into each room. He'd tilt his chin up toward the ceiling as if checking, but his eyes were more on the furniture, the closets, the layout. "Good place," he said. "Quiet. Do you usually work nights or days?" The question stuck out like a burr. It had nothing to do with smoke detectors. I shrugged it off and said, "Both." When we got to the kitchen, he paused near the sliding back door. He tugged the handle, nodded, then jotted something down. "Old locks," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Could use upgrading." He didn't actually look up at the smoke detector in that room. By the time he left, I was uneasy. 10 minutes had stretched into 20, and I started feeling like this inspection had nothing to do with safety at all. He hadn't tested a single alarm. Not once did he press the test button or shine a flashlight. That night, I double-checked the doors. Everything seemed fine. I chalked it up to me being overly cautious and tried to sleep. Around 1 a.m, I woke up to the faint sound of metal rattling. Not loud, more like a cautious jiggle. I slipped out of bed, moved toward the kitchen, and saw it. The back door handle turning ever so slightly. The deadbolt was still set, but the knob lock wasn't. I knew for a fact I had locked it. Someone had unlocked it earlier. The only time it could have happened was when Aaron stood there with his clipboard, pretending to check the door. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispered the details, gave them the address. While I was on the call, the jiggling stopped. By the time a patrol car rolled up 10 minutes later, the backyard was empty. 2 officers checked the perimeter. No footprints they could make out in the gravel. No sign of forced entry. Just me, rattled, standing barefoot in the kitchen. I told them about Aaron, the polo, the badge. They shook their heads. Airbnb doesn't send people out like that, one of them said. If there's ever an issue, it's handled by the host. I pulled up the app and messaged the host right then. She wrote back quickly, saying she hadn't sent anyone and had no idea what I was talking about. She seemed alarmed, promised to call Airbnb support. The officers filed a report, told me to keep the deadbolt locked, and recommended sticking to hotels in the future. The rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I dragged a chair under the front doorknob, shoved a stool against the sliding door, and sat up with the lights on until sunrise. The next day, I cut the stay short, packed my bags, checked into a chain hotel closer to the hospital, and ate the cost of the unused nights. Airbnb support eventually reached out, but the conversation was frustrating. They apologized, refunded me, but insisted they couldn't verify the man I described had anything to do with their platform. It was a dead end. A couple of days later, scrolling through a Fresno neighborhood Facebook group, I saw a post that made my skin crawl. A woman wrote about a man coming to her short-term rental, claiming to be maintenance, asking odd questions about whether she was staying alone. Her description matched mine down to the shaved head and clipboard. The comments were full of speculation. Some said scammer, some said burglar, others suggested something worse. I didn't chime in. What would I add? That I'd already met him, and I'd already learned that a deadbolt only protects you if the person hasn't already had a chance to unlock everything else. Now, whenever I travel for work, I carry a small rubber door wedge in my bag. Costs a couple bucks, fits in my pocket, and it's the only thing that makes me feel like I have control over a door someone else installed. I don't care how safe the listing looks, how polite the host seems, or how quiet the neighborhood feels. If a stranger in a polo ever shows up with a clipboard again, I won't be asking for a badge. I'll be shutting the door. Locks only work if you're the one holding the key. When I booked the Airbnb in Sedona, I pictured long, quiet mornings with my laptop, a mug of coffee, and the view of the red rocks glowing orange at sunrise. I'd been working remotely for over a year, and April felt like the perfect time to try a working vacation, somewhere quiet, inspiring, and warm. The listing looked ideal. A one-bedroom casita attached to a larger house, private entrance, fast Wi-Fi, and a little patio facing desert scrub. The host, Eric, had dozens of glowing reviews calling him helpful and welcoming. After 2 years of traveling and staying in Airbnbs on and off, I figured I knew what to expect. The first day, he seemed exactly as advertised. Eric was mid-40s, tan, talkative. He met me in the driveway, helped roll my suitcase inside, and gave me a basket of fruit. Grapefruits, oranges, even a jar of local honey. He pointed out the best grocery store, recommended a few hikes, and left me with a cheerful, "I like to check in every so often to make sure guests are comfortable." I thought nothing of it. Some hosts are more social, and Sedona felt safe. The first odd moment came on day 2. Around noon, while I was mid-Zoom call, there was a knock. Eric stood there holding a set of towels. "Thought you might want some fresh ones," he said. I'd barely touched the ones already hanging, but I thanked him. He lingered in the doorway, asking about my work, about my dog, who wasn't even traveling with me. After 5 minutes, I had to say, I should get back to my meeting. Day 3, he stopped by again, this time just to check the water pressure. He let himself into the bathroom while I sat on the couch, laptop open, wondering if this was normal here. He came out smiling, said it all looked fine, and left. By the end of the week, it was daily. Once it was banana bread he'd made too much of. Another time, a hummingbird feeder he thought would brighten up the patio. He showed up in the mornings, evenings, sometimes both. Each time cheerful, each time with a reason that sounded plausible if you didn't stack them together. I started feeling watched, like he knew when I'd been sitting outside or when I was cooking. One afternoon, I came back from a short hike and found the blinds angled differently than I'd left them. Another day, my charging cable was draped across the counter instead of coiled by the outlet. Nothing dramatic. Just small things you only notice because you live alone. I told myself I might be misremembering, that I was working too many hours, tired and overthinking. But I couldn't shake the feeling, so I started taking photos before leaving. My laptop's position, the blinds, the items in the fridge. By week 2, the photos confirmed it. A bottle of sparkling water had moved shelves. My toothbrush leaned at a different angle. One morning, my sneakers were shifted closer to the door. I thought about messaging Airbnb, but worried I didn't have enough proof. If he had a spare key, and clearly he did, it would come down to my word against his. And technically, he hadn't stolen anything or damaged anything. He was just there. Too much. Then came the night everything broke. It was April 14th, a Friday. I'd worked late, closed my laptop around midnight, and fallen asleep on the couch with a show humming quietly on my headphones. Around 2 a.m., I woke with a start. Not from a noise, but from a feeling, like a weird pressure in the room. I sat up, pulled the headphones off. The patio door, which I always locked, was open just an inch. The desert air moved the curtain. On the kitchen counter, a dish towel I hadn't used was spread flat, perfectly aligned with the edge. I didn't move for a long time. My phone sat charging on the coffee table, and I reached for it carefully. I dialed Airbnb's emergency line, whispering as I explained. The rep urged me to call 911 right away. The police came quickly. Sedona isn't a big town. They found no forced entry, no broken lock, just the unlocked slider. They walked through the unit, shined flashlights into corners, asked me to check if anything was missing. Nothing was gone, just rearranged. One officer asked if I knew the host well. I told him about the daily visits, the towel set, the banana bread. His voice got firmer. You should leave tonight. I packed in under 20 minutes. Essentials first: laptop, charger, toiletries. Clothes stuffed into my suitcase with none of the careful folding I'd done the first day. I checked into a chain hotel off the highway at 3 a.m., double-locked the door, and slept with the lights on. The next morning, Eric texted. Sorry, I must have left the patio unlatched when I dropped off a towel last night. My mistake. I never responded. Airbnb refunded the unused nights after I explained, though I noticed they didn't remove the listing. Weeks later, curious, I looked it up again. Same property, same photos, same glowing reviews. Except buried halfway down was one that made my stomach flip. Beautiful casita, great view. Host very attentive, stop by every day to check on things. A little too much for us, but otherwise fine. That word. Attentive. Now, no matter where I stay, I wedge a chair under the door at night. I take photos when I leave a room. I don't care if it feels paranoid. Because I learned something in Sedona. Safety isn't about locks or listings. It's about trust. And once it's broken, you can't unsee the signs. When you work night shifts in an ER, you get used to two things: exhaustion and improvising. You learn to roll with whatever's in front of you, whether it's a serious injury at 3 a.m. or a broken vending machine when you haven't eaten in 12 hours. That's kind of how I approach traveling too. Last summer, I booked an Airbnb in Tulsa. Not because it was nice, I just needed somewhere clean, quiet, and close to the hospital where I was filling in for 6 weeks. The listing seemed fine. Cozy little bungalow, self-check-in, decent reviews. The photos showed a bright kitchen, a small living room with a plaid couch, and a bedroom with plain white sheets. Nothing fancy, but I wasn't planning on spending much time there anyway. I got the code the night before check-in. The host messaged me, said his name was Greg, and told me to make myself at home. Pretty standard. The day I arrived, it was hot enough that the steering wheel of my rental car felt like a griddle. Tulsa in June doesn't play around. I pulled into the driveway around 6 p.m., tired from the drive, duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The neighborhood was quiet. Small houses, trimmed lawns. One of those neighborhoods where every dog barks when you step out of your car. I punched in the code on the keypad, heard the deadbolt slide, and pushed the door open. The air was nice and cool inside, like the AC had been going nonstop. I stepped into the kitchen, dropped my bag on the counter, and froze. He was right there, a man, standing in the kitchen. He had a glass of water in his hand like he belonged there. Jeans, faded t-shirt, hair buzzed short, mid-40s, maybe. "Hey," he said, casual as anything, "you must be the guest." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, then at the glass in his hand, then back at the door I just unlocked with the host's code. Yeah, I said finally, "and you are?" He smiled like I just cracked a joke. "I'm Greg's brother. He didn't tell you?" The words landed flat. My phone was still in my hand from unlocking the door. I pulled up the Airbnb app and checked the messages. No mention of a brother. No mention of anyone else. Just the code and a welcome. Make yourself at home. "I don't think so," I said carefully. He nodded, took a sip of water. "Yeah, sometimes he forgets stuff. I just stopped by to check on things. Make sure the place is good for guests." That might have sounded believable if he hadn't been standing there already inside. Like he hadn't needed me to unlock the door. I set my bag down, but didn't take my eyes off him. ER training teaches you to clock details under stress. Left-handed grip on the glass, no visible weapon, distance to the front door, maybe 12 feet. "You here to stay?" I asked. "Nah," he said. "Just making sure everything works. AC, fridge, you know?" He grinned again. "Hospital guy, right?" That made me pause. My profile says nothing about my job. Airbnb doesn't show that. I hadn't told Greg what I do. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. He shrugged. "Greg mentioned it. Said you do long shifts. Said you'd like quiet." That was enough. I'll check with Greg, I said. I stepped back outside and let the door click shut. From the driveway, I texted the host. There's a man in the house. Says he's your brother. What's going on? 3 dots blinked, then disappeared, then nothing. I sat in the car with the engine running, watching the kitchen window. After about 2 minutes, the man inside walked into the living room, looked out, and pulled the curtain halfway closed. I called Airbnb support. The rep sounded more bored than alarmed until I used the phrase, unauthorized person in the rental. Then she got serious. She told me to leave the property immediately and promised to escalate the case. She said they'd contact the host. 15 minutes later, Greg finally texted back. Oh, that's just my brother Steve. He helps me with the place. Don't worry about it. I wrote, your listing says nothing about other people. I didn't agree to share the space. No answer. I drove to a motel that night. Cheap, loud AC, scratchy sheets, but at least nobody else had the key. The next morning, I checked the listing again. Still active. Still advertising private guest suite. Still no mention of Steve. Out of stubbornness, or maybe just stupidity, I drove back to the house in daylight. The front blinds were open. My bag was gone from where I dropped it. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, harder. Finally, the door cracked open. It was him, Steve. Same faded t-shirt, same too friendly smile. Hey man, he said. You left quick last night? Thought you'd be back. My bag, I said. He held it up like he'd been expecting the request. Safe and sound. He passed it through the crack in the door. Then, almost as an afterthought, you should relax, man. We're just making sure everything's okay. We? I asked. He didn't answer. Just gave that same grin and closed the door. I stood on the porch for a full 30 seconds, bag in hand, trying to make sense of it. Then I left. I reported everything to Airbnb again. Sent them screenshots, the text exchange, even described Steve. They refunded my stay and pulled the listing. But that didn't erase the image of walking into a place I'd been told was mine for the week, and finding someone already inside, drinking water like he owned it. Now, every time I book an Airbnb, I look for reviews that mention privacy or host interactions. And every time I walk into a new place, there's a second of hesitation at the threshold. A thought I can't quite shake. What if someone's already in there? I've always been careful when I travel. I triple-check reviews, stick to verified listings, and never book the cheapest option. My friends tease me about it, but when you're a 22-year-old woman traveling alone, you learn quickly that being cautious is just survival. In March of last year, I took a solo trip to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I'd been saving up for months, partly to decompress from work stress, partly to prove to myself I could enjoy traveling alone without leaning on anyone else. Eureka Springs looked perfect, quiet, historic, and full of quirky cabins listed on Airbnb. The place I picked was a converted carriage house behind an old Victorian home. The pictures made it look cozy. Exposed beams, floral curtains, an iron bed frame. The host's profile was all sunshine and rainbows, full of glowing reviews about how kind and accommodating she was. When I got there, everything matched the photos. The host gave me a quick tour, pointed out the kitchen setup, and handed me the key. She was friendly, but a little too watchful. Her eyes lingered when I mentioned I was traveling solo. It wasn't overtly creepy, just enough that I noticed. I brushed it off. People can just be nosy. The first night was fine. I cooked pasta, watched Netflix on my laptop, and went to bed early. The second night, I started noticing little things. The carriage house had one bedroom upstairs with a narrow staircase. When I went to bed, I noticed a bolt lock on the outside of the bedroom door. At first, I thought it was some leftover hardware from when the building was used for storage. Still, it gave me pause. A lock that keeps people in, not out, isn't something you see every day. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the previous owners had weird security habits. I pulled the bedroom door shut but didn't latch it. I figured it didn't matter. I was the only one inside. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of creaking floorboards. At first, I thought it was the old house settling. Then, I heard it again. Measured, human steps, moving slowly in the hallway downstairs. I froze, listening. The sound came up the staircase. Then, silence. The bedroom door was almost shut. Just a sliver of light from the hall visible through the gap. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear movement. Just stillness, like whoever was there was waiting. My eyes fell on that bolt lock outside the door. A picture bloomed in my head. The door slowly swinging shut. The scrape of metal. The bolt sliding into place. And me, stuck inside. I didn't wait to see if that would happen. I grabbed my bag, shoved my laptop into it, and eased the bedroom window open. It was a tight fit, but the adrenaline made me reckless. I climbed out onto the small roof overhang and dropped to the gravel below. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop to think about it. I jogged across the yard around to the front and out to the street. I didn't even look back at the house. At a gas station a mile down the road, I called a rideshare to take me to a hotel. While I waited, I texted the host. Emergency came up. Had to leave early. Will message about checkout later. No explanation. No details. She didn't respond. The next morning in the hotel lobby, I pulled up the Airbnb app and requested to cut the stay short. The host wrote back a short message. Sorry to hear that. Hope everything's okay. Nothing else. I left a private review for Airbnb support, detailing exactly what I'd experienced. The lock, the footsteps, the sense someone had been outside my room. They refunded the remaining nights. I never figured out what would have happened if I'd stayed. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just creaky floorboards and me freaking myself out. But every time I replay that night, I see the bolt lock, the way the footsteps paused outside the door, and the silence that followed. Now, I don't even unpack until I've made sure every door and window's good to go. If I see a lock where it doesn't belong, on the wrong side of the door, I leave. No questions, no explanations. Because a lock like that isn't an accident. And once it slides shut, you don't get to choose when it opens again. If you also thought the worst part wasn't the host knocking, it was realizing they'd already been inside, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and share in the comments what you always check before settling in. And if you thought the scariest part of a gas station was overpriced snacks, you're about to learn different. Click now to watch 4 creepy gas station horror stories. Because the scariest thing isn't the empty lot, it's realizing you're not as alone as you thought. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.